Hello, and welcome to Assessment Myths, Shattering Misconceptions, a part of Campus Intelligence, your source for reimagining data and higher ed. My name is Tyler McLean. I serve as a manager at Campus Labs and will be helping to facilitate today's webinar. Campus Intelligence offers something for all areas of campus: analytics and insight, improvement in assessment, teaching and learning, retention and success, and student engagement. Whether you're focused on improving student engagement, assessing student learning, or aligning goals with your institutional mission, we're confident you'll find valuable insights to support your daily work. To kick off our introductions, I'd first like to welcome Dr. Ann Lundquist to introduce herself, and then the SAAL board members who have partnered with Campus Labs for today's topic of discussion.
Thank you, Tyler. Hello, everyone. We're really excited to be partnering with SAAL on this great webinar and glad so many of you could join us today. I'm Ann Lundquist, and I'll serve as the facilitator for our conversation today. And in my role at Campus Labs, I work with many of our member campuses and also with folks who are thinking about best practices in assessment, particularly in the student affairs space. So what I'd like to do is give you a little overview of what we're going to do today, and then I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. We've engaged in a rich dialogue about the planning for this webinar, and we're really glad that we can talk about some widely held assessment myths. I was thinking about the word myth, and it's traditions and stories and legends and sometimes even false ideas that get passed around. And what we're hoping to do today is to be able to share some of those and also then engage in some myth busting around that. So as I mentioned, I'll serve as facilitator. We'll start off by having our panelists introduce themselves, share some introductory information about SAAL, and then we're going to talk through 4 categories of assessment myths, along with some ideas and suggestions and strategies for moving beyond those myths. And we have a little bit more information about SAAL and the ways that you can get involved at the end of the webinar. So I'd like to start out with having Joe introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Levy, and I currently serve as the Executive Director of Assessment and Accreditation at National Louis University. And within my assessment capacity, I'm responsible for institutional assessment of our university learning outcomes and supporting program assessment happening for the academic disciplines. And then I also lead and work with our student affairs areas. And with the SAAL organization, Student Affairs Assessment Leaders, I am the chair for the Professional Development Committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Judd Harbin. I'm the Executive Director for Student Affairs Strategic Planning and Assessment at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. Within SAAL, I am currently serving as the chair of the board.
Hello, my name is Nicole Long, and I'm the Director of Assessment, Research, and Operations in the Division of Student Life at the University of Delaware. There, I'm responsible for developing a culture of assessment and evidence-based decision-making through oversight of division-wide assessment initiatives, assessment training, as well as support of departmental assessment activities. Within Student Affairs Assessment Leaders, I serve as the member at large to the board, as well as the SAAL rep to the Council for the Advancement of Standards.
Hello, I'm Ciji Heiser. I'm the Director of Assessment and Effectiveness at Western Michigan University for Student Affairs, and I spend my time on divisional strategic planning, building an assessment culture, working with data analysis and analytics, and supporting the institutional initiatives around accreditation, as well as academic support assessment areas. In my capacity with the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders, I am the board member at large elect.
Thank you all so much. And Judd is going to talk to us just a little bit about the SAAL organization.
Thank you, Ann. Yes, SAAL was founded in 2008, so we are still a fairly young organization. We got our start after a conversation between Gavin Hemming and Aaron Bentram at the NASPA Assessment and Retention Conference in Scottsdale, Arizona. That conference now is called the NASPA Assessment, Persistence, and Data Analytics Conference and will be held in June. I believe it's in Orlando this year. But after that initial discussion in 2008, a group of 11 folks started to form and continue the discussion via conference calls, and by December of 2008, SAAL was born. Over the next 10 years, the group has grew to more than 1,000 members. And the goals of SAAL are articulated in our bylaws, and you'll see those on the green bubble on your screen. In case the green bubble is not visible to you, I will read that. So our goals include educators are responsible for coordinating and directing student affairs assessment efforts. And as educators, we have the skills, knowledge, and professional support to be effective and ethical assessment leaders who are sensitive to culture and context. Goal number 2, assessment leaders share and benefit from a sense of affiliation and community with each other. And our third goal, there's a measurable improvement in the perceived value of assessment and its effectiveness within the field. SAAL functions through a board of directors that includes 8 voting members and 8 elect or non-voting members, and the past chair of the board who sits as an advisory member but does not vote. We have 5 standing committees, and if we can advance to the next slide. There we go. The 5 standing committees include external relations, which is that committee which helps SAAL to connect to other associations and their members. This committee is responsible for managing our collaborations through social media presence, our networking socials at ACPA, NASPA, and other large assessment conferences or institutes, and maintains our website. The Governance and Administration Committee is an internal committee that helps kind of guide and steward us so that we're sure that we are sticking with our bylaws and helps us to manage our resources. This committee is also responsible for reviewing our bylaws to help us to identify any areas that we need to update. The Membership Committee processes new member requests, manages our listserv and our member database. The Advancement Committee oversees the publication of the Journal of Student Affairs Inquiry and periodically administers a landscape survey. Now, this survey is going to be coming out later this spring. We are in the process of finalizing that now, so please do be on the watch for that to show up if you are a student affairs assessment leader. And then finally, the Professional Development Committee stewards our signature professional development opportunity, that is our structured conversations. This committee also manages the SAAL blog and our online course in student affairs assessment, which we administer in collaboration with Colorado State University.
Thank you, Joe. I'm Judd. I was thinking about Joe. Joe's going to talk about the course at the end, so I'm jumping ahead. So thanks so much. So now what we're going to do is our panel has organized some of the myths and the myth busting into 4 areas: a culture of practice, data and accountability, data and resources, and data and validity. So they'll walk through some of the myths around those areas and also some strategies for busting those myths. Feel free to type questions into the question box, as Tyler mentioned at the beginning, as we go, and either we'll be able to incorporate those as we move along, and we'll certainly get to them at the end of the webinar if we haven't addressed them already. So I'll get started with having Nicole talk to us about our first myth around culture of practice.
Thank you, Anne. In a lot of the recent literature in student affairs assessment, we hear a lot about developing a culture of assessment, developing a culture of evidence. So we have 4 myths related to culture of practice that we would like to bust for you. The first myth that we're going to tackle is a myth of not being empowered to do one's assessment work. So oftentimes people are waiting for the broader organization, it might be your student affairs division or maybe even your department, to institute a formal structure for assessment or even set the tone for how assessment work should be accomplished. So some of these formalities may appear, or maybe you don't have them already at your institution, through means of annual reports, assessment committees, divisional learning outcomes, departmental outcomes, and so forth. But absent of these structures, individuals can engage in good assessment practice for programs and services in their immediate purview. You don't need to wait for someone else to necessarily lead the charge. We might often see this happening, particularly among newer professionals who might have recently graduated from student affairs assessment, professional preparation programs that have rigorous assessment training, or even people who are engaging in doctoral degree study as well, may have some of that energy for assessment. And you can do it, absent of formal leadership as well. So increasingly more individuals are adopting a personal responsibility for using evidence to make informed, responsible decisions to guide their work. That top-down directive is not required. for an individual to do what they know has been articulated as an expectation in our profession. And we see that illustrated through the assessment skills and knowledge standards from ACPA and NASPA, as well as just the broader accountability movement in higher education. So yes, it is a reality that some staff may not feel supported through resources to engage in assessment work. When this is the case, start small and focus on what is reasonable, given your own time, resources, and expertise. And I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so another element at play here is this idea of legacy practice of we've always done it this way. And one of the things to question with that is, well, who was leading it, and was past practice ideal or as intentional as it should be? Another consideration with past practice is people might have the mindset of, well, don't fix what isn't broken. What we've been doing so far has been fine, and we're not noted by our accreditors, so why do we need to change? But that's where you can challenge market, industry, technology, student needs, those have all changed. So practice may need to change as well, or adapt to be sure that you're addressing those elements. And so one of the things I think about here is that assessment can not only be, a reason to drive in this way, but it can be this catalyst, and it can be a support to change toward betterment in order to better meet those needs. So if you see through assessment data that you're not meeting needs, or that practices are not as efficient or as effective or meaningful as they could be, that's information you can use to then challenge any of these traditional legacy notions of how practice is going on campus. I'll turn it over to Judd now to talk about another myth.
Judd, I'm not sure if your mic is muted. Can you
Thank
tell?
You.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm sure
I was just talking away.
You said brilliant
I was
things.
saying some wonderful and insightful things, yes. So this myth is the assessment staff do assessment. And here I'm going to take us back to the definition of assessment being the systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of data to enhance effectiveness. And I would also link us to the organic iterative cycle of assessment that Mackie and Bresciani have shown us, where the cycle of assessment includes planning programs and services, delivering them, collecting the data, analyzing and interpreting that, and then using the findings for follow-up and future planning. If this myth were true, assessment staff would be telling programming staff how to design and deliver programs, to whom and when. The programming staff would merely be technicians implementing the instructions of the assessment staff. So this myth speaks more to a hegemonic environment where assessment staff are the ones making decisions while others carry them out. I have never been in an environment where that was actually the case. Rather, the cycle of assessment calls for a collaborative relationship between programming staff who design and deliver the programs and the assessment staff who then consult on data collection and analysis. The programming staff have the direct contact with their students. So they are the ones that are on hand at events to collect the data, to observe how the students are responding to the content of the program. They're the ones who are the experts in the subject matter of the program, while assessment staff are the experts in the process and methods of data collection and analysis. And together, we do assessment. I think the next person up is maybe Ciji.
Yeah, hi. So I'm going to talk about, I was confusing Anne's mouse with my own. It was making unmuting myself challenging. So I'm going to talk about the last myth with regard to culture of practice for today, and that is that data is owned by certain areas and not to be shared. And throughout my practice, I've learned some tips and tricks around data ownership with regard to reciprocity in order to really advance a culture of practices. A culture of assessment. And so my bust to this myth is that there's a lot of room in assessment and strategic planning for sharing data and information and demonstrating reciprocity. And so the first way that I think you can bust this myth of data ownership is by treating people like the content experts that they are and offering support as the kind of assessment expert in areas where you think that they can really use it. So for example, I'll often defer to the programmers and the content managers and those who are really our most front-facing staff with students to help me design the questions to answer their burning questions about their practice. But then especially the first time I'm working with an assessment, I'll often offer to write up the assessment report. And this may seem really time intensive, and initially it is, but it pays dividends in terms of developing a culture of action and in terms of moving the needle of ownership, because it allows you to share a template for report writing. It allows you to communicate clear expectations for what a report should look like, not 25 pages, perhaps, maybe. It also allows you to encourage people to share their information in a way that's going to help them. And it also has the added benefit of giving you the information that you might need as an assessment practitioner moving forward. Another way to bust the myth of data ownership is through data sharing and communication, which seems pretty intuitive, right? A lot of times units are really focused internally on their units and their departments, and that's often where their attention needs to be. But I've learned as a student affairs practitioner that my job's also to consider what are the needs of the division at large, and how do I get us talking about those needs. And one strategy that I used for doing that was to ask each department to develop their either a KPI or to use some metrics to tell their story. What are the most core metrics to their operation? And I got a lot of questions as to why. Why are you asking me to do this? This is more busy work. And I shared with them an institutional metric document that had 25 pages worth of metrics, and I think 3 or 4 of them were related to student affairs. And I said, I'm asking because I don't think that this really represents the scale and scope of the work that the people in this room are doing. And that shifted the narrative really, really fast from this being a top-down process to we want to better represent our work. What do you need from us? So data sharing and communication. And then finally, I have found that the gift of resources really helps people open up and share their information. And so I think that when we can do things like provide templates or provide branded infographics that are standard across the division or across the department, it really eases the ability for people to share their information because they don't have to think about the structures within which to do it.
All right, and next up we'll be talking about data and accountability. And one of the first myths in this area is, this isn't my job. Assessment isn't my job. I think this one pops up a lot when we view assessment as an add-on after the fact responsibility. This usually contributes to that, to seeing assessment as a burden and not a part of one's essential duties and responsibilities. What I would challenge on this one is, it helps to see assessment as an integral part of designing and delivering programs to effectively serve your students. This means that you have an integral role to play in making sure that your students get from those programs what you intended for them to gain. Plus, programming staff have direct contact with the students. The programming staff are the ones who have the opportunity to discern whether or not a particular student is getting it, and then they have that opportunity to immediately intervene. I like to say, when I'm talking to staff here, that making sure I design and deliver programs that effectively serve my students is my job. That's based on an ethic of fidelity. I promised you certain outcomes if you participate. Assessment is how I make sure that you got those.
Another common myth related to data and accountability is the myth that this wasn't on my strategy or my goal list for the year or the semester. In other words, I didn't plan to do assessment or incorporate any sort of ongoing assessment or even assessment as on an ad hoc basis. But in reality, assessment should be embedded in all the work we do, similarly to what Judd said, rather than seen as a separate, unrelated activity. So when assessment is embedded in all the work that we do, it will help to inform the strategic directions we take in our organizations. Additionally, assessment can be used to measure progress toward goal achievement. So how often do you see strategic goals outlined in our work that have no corresponding assessment strategy? We do see this quite a bit. And how often do we see goals that are not grounded or informed in data? Again, we see this quite a bit. So sure, there are goals we have at our institutions that will always be at the forefront. Things such as retention, degree completion, first destination after college. But how might these goals be enriched when we have data to not only support the goal itself, but help us to determine reasonable and timely aspirations for achieving those goals?
I'm not sure who was going to talk about this one. This next myth that we have about assessment results and evaluating our programs. Ciji, is this you?
Yep, that's me. So in many ways, and I was having mute difficulties again. In a lot of ways, assessment was really designed in response to calls for accountability, many of which came from the Spellings Commission around student learning outcomes. And as a mechanism for accountability, it can often be seen as a top-down, really bureaucratic process that is associated with, if I do poorly or if my results come back poorly, I'm going to be held accountable for this. And I think that while it can be about accountability, most practitioners I see really also are trying to inspire staff to develop their own questions and get curious about their own work and have a sense of inquiry around the results of their efforts. And one of the ways, and this is founded by research that's coming out of the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. There was a report released in 2014 that talked about the shift in mentality for provosts away from strictly doing data collection and analysis and engaging in the assessment cycle for purposes of accreditation and for purposes of reporting, and towards really having this curiosity about the impact of programs. So instead of, what do I need to do or what report do I need to write, this mentality is changing more towards what, I wonder how my programs and services are supporting students, or I wonder if diverse students are getting the same outcomes, or if I need to change something about my programs to better serve different populations. And at my past institution, one of the ways that we pushed a little bit against this top-down process and really allowed students to share with us what their priorities was that we had a budget for renovations, and we had a lot of plans for how we were going to use that budget. And we were getting ready to launch a institution-wide survey across about 10,000 students. And, we talked about it and we decided to say, here are the top 15 things we could probably afford. We can't do them all, but let's lean on the students to tell us how we should prioritize this investment. And it really shifted gears. It was about us being curious about how the students would prioritize our finances. And it was also about less about top down and more about engaging the students and helping us make the right choices for them, and being led by their decision. So we gave them 15 options and asked them to rank it. And then we were able to use that information to invest accordingly. And then we turned around and shared that information back out with students and said, okay, these were your top rated priorities for how to invest in the infrastructure on campus and how to renovate the residence halls. And here's the timeline for the projects, and we will keep you updated. And so the next myth that we're going to talk about is that nothing is ever done with assessment results. And I hear this a lot in terms of I filled out this report that you wanted and nothing happened. It just went into a black hole. And I think that this is probably the case too often. And so one of the ways to bust this myth is that sharing results leads to the use of results for effective decision-making, improvement, and change. And I alluded to this in my last example, in terms of sharing back out with students what happens. But I think the same kind of reciprocity can be shared with staff. When we are at our institution now, we do mid-year reporting and end-of-year reporting. And each year at mid-year reporting, I'm getting now into this zone where I print off everyone's mid-year strategic report and I go through it line by line, and then I meet with them and provide feedback, or at least that's what we will be doing this year. I also produce mid-year reports, just like one-page summaries, so that people can see where their work was represented and that someone did pay attention. And I also also share those summaries with my VP. At the end of the year, when everyone reports on their strategic plans, we use that to generate a strategic update and outcomes report for the division that is often shared with the president's cabinet. And we also make sure that everybody in the division gets a copy or sees some kind of summary of that so that they know that information was attended to and is being used. We also, last year and in prior years, use reporting information to generate awards. So last year I had one office that really in every way was going to the extremes in the best possible way to account for diverse populations and make sure that the programs and services that they were supplying and the way that they were measuring them were really being as inclusive as they could be. And so I saw that throughout all of their reporting, and I asked the VP if we could give out an Inclusive Excellence Award. At another department that for every single data point, they had an action item. So they were really working hard to close the assessment cycle and revisiting that, that action items to see if the changes they made a difference. And so we did a data-driven decision-making award as well. Additional options, in addition to awards and reports and one-page summaries, are also branding campaigns. The University of North Carolina at Wilmington has a fantastic branding campaign. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Student Affairs also has a really good campaign for rebranding not only the data itself, but the action items that came from it as a way of sharing accountability and data and shifting that gear away from accountability in a negative sense and more towards we're accountable for using the information that we collect from you.
All right, so I'm going to look to shift gears and talk a little about myths related to data and resources. The first one is this idea that we don't have enough. We don't have enough resources, including time, money, or I don't have the skill set to be able to do assessment. And those are very real concerns and limitations that can be worked through. But it's also important to recognize that folks might be overestimating what's required. In order to do assessment work, you do not necessarily need special software. You do not necessarily need tons of people to be working on every piece and part. And you don't necessarily need money because some people, it could be folded into their job and their responsibility and the work that they're already doing. And it may not take as much time as you're thinking. Sometimes it's just the getting started that can be overwhelming to think about. But oftentimes, especially with assessment, the work you put in up front pays off in the end. It's truly setting yourself up for success for later when you have an intentional plan and you lay a strong foundation. And I think another piece too is that folks might not be recognizing the skills and abilities that they already have related to this work. So many times you'll sit down with a student affairs person who may be new to assessment and they say that, I don't understand this. This is a totally different language. But then if you sit and talk to them, they'll share examples of how they're collecting data and how they're using it to make decisions moving forward. Now, maybe they're not collecting student learning data, but they're at least doing some of the work. And so, recognizing that people already have some of these skill sets, and also people might be assuming that any data they collect then will require, linear regressions and intense statistical analysis. But there's a lot that can be gleaned just from very simple descriptive statistics, looking at averages, looking at counts, seeing the sentiment of comments, and even where perhaps you personally might not feel the most skilled or resourceful here, you have other internal colleagues. There are other people on your campus who are assessment champions or experienced in that way. Likewise, you can tap into your faculty because we know that assessment on the academic side of the house has been going on far longer than on the student affairs side of the house. So you can tap into them for their experience, skills, and support. And you also then have a sea of external colleagues to lean on here as well. And in case you are shy or not about outreach and maybe want to do more of a a passive investigation, there is a wealth of free webinars like this one and more, and free resources and white papers and templates, as well as courses and workshops and conferences, that you can look to take advantage of to learn more and gain some tools and tips in looking to do this work. And it's really important too that as you get that information that's helpful for you, to pass that along, as well as practice gets going and you find things that are useful, creating and documenting those resources on your own campus and circulating them for others.
Great. Another myth is we don't know where to go for help with assessment. And Joe provided already some great ideas about how you can continue to get information on how you can engage in good assessment work. And as he mentioned before, between the experts on your campus and all of the internet resources, there are a number of avenues that you can pursue for assistance. It's really a destination, and you are in the driver's seat of how you want to access information. An assessment can sometimes feel isolating, especially if you're considered the shop of one. We typically see this at the division level at many institutions, have one assessment person for the division, or maybe you're the one person in your department who is tapped to lead the assessment charge. So even if you are the lone assessment person in your unit, division, or campus, there are these resources that you can tap into. As Joe mentioned, particularly reaching out to faculty, they can be an excellent resource, as well as Centers for Teaching and Learning, in helping you think through how to conduct student learning assessment in the curriculum. And in fact, there are more and more instances in student affairs where we're applying curricular approaches to student learning, as well as student learning assessment in the co-curriculum. And we tend to see this, particularly, I feel like we see this a lot within residence life programming, residence life programs, academic services, and so forth. Another great campus partner to associate yourself with is your institutional research office. They have access to all of the institutional data that you could imagine, and they can really provide some really good assistance on helping you with the design aspects of your assessment projects, as well as just helping you get data. Now, when you get off campus, again, the resources are unlimited. Between national, regional, or even local drive-in conferences, those can be great opportunities for you to connect with colleagues who are engaging in similar work, whether it be about assessment or even specific functional areas and how assessment interplays in those, as well as obtaining resources for how you might improve upon your existing assessment practice. So there are conferences specifically designated for assessment, such as the ACPA Assessment Institute. As Judd mentioned previously, the NASPA Assessment Persistence and Data Analytics Conference. There's the Association for the Assessment of Learning in Higher Education, the IUPUI Assessment Conference, and so forth. As well as even within other student affairs associations, they may have assessment tracks or standing committees or other sorts of networking groups that are focusing on assessment within that specific functional area. This is an excellent way for you to tap in to the expertise that is surrounded by you, that is surrounding you among your colleagues. And so we recognize too that not everyone has the professional development funding to attend conferences. So as Joe mentioned before, let your fingertips do the work, and you can access a lot of these resources online that are open source or free, such as listservs. The Student Affairs Assessment Leaders listservs is excellent, as well as Assess. And the really cool thing about these listservs is the community that is found within them and how willing people are to share their expertise, their knowledge, as well as resources, provide feedback on specific assessment topics or questions that you have. And webinars such as this one, as mentioned before, these are great ways to engage with other assessment professionals.
Great, and I have the last one in this section. I don't have enough time to start a full-blown assessment project. How many times have you said that to someone that's coordinating assessment in your division, or how many times have you heard this if you are the assessment coordinator for your division? I think this myth springs from a belief that we don't have any evidence or data, so we're going to have to start from scratch or from square one. Here, I think staff might not realize the evidence that they already have at their fingertips and how to analyze it. A few years ago, I had an opportunity to work with a director who scheduled an appointment with me because she needed to do assessment. And the first thing she said when I sat down with her was a big sigh. And then she said, I need to develop a survey. And my question to her was, why? And she said, well, I need to assess learning outcomes. And I'm like, yes, but why do you need to do a survey with that? Could you do it more directly? And she kind of perked up and was like, well, what do you mean? So we started talking about what she does through the course of her program with the students, what the students are producing as they're participating. And it turns out she already had quite a bit of evidence that she already had at her fingertips. She had participation rosters. She had some artifacts from activities and exercises that they completed. Some of those were tweets that were sent out through Twitter. Some of those were some reflection pieces that she had them write. And then she had copious notes from where she would sit down with the student leaders in charge of this event and review the program afterward. So she already had quite a bit of evidence already at her fingertips. She just needed to very systematically analyze it. We wound up being able to construct an assessment plan for her that did not involve a survey. And it was a very exciting process for her. By the time that she and I had finished our consultation, she was like, okay, I came into this, I was really frustrated that I was going to have to do a survey, and now I'm actually kind of stoked. And I'm kind of excited about doing assessment now. And I was like, yay, my work is done. I can go home now. But it was a fantastic conversation, and it's served as a really good example for me to use of how we can have this information already available. We just don't necessarily think of what we have as the data or the evidence that we need for assessment.
So the last thematic area around myths that we're going to talk about is data and validity. And the first myth that we want to bust here is that I don't have good data or enough data to make decisions. And the way we want to bust that myth is really by disavowing people of this notion that there is bad data. Because even and I have seen some, I've coded a lot of qualitative data that was hard to read. It wasn't, the students were not saying overly positive things in that context, but with every constructive comment that a student had, I had an action item that I could take back to a leadership team to talk about how we could improve our services to better meet student needs. And so even at its worst, data can still be used to generate action items and respond, and then be transparent in that response process to let students know that they've been heard. Oftentimes this idea of data being good enough comes out of fear that our data is not reliable or valid. And when we think about reliability, right, we're thinking about throwing darts. And I love that at the very beginning of this webinar, when we were talking about the 4 themes, there was actually a dartboard with a target and an arrow stuck in the center of it for this theme. And that's exactly right. Because when we think about reliability, we think about throwing darts. When we think about validity, we think about actually hitting the dartboard or the target that we're aiming at. And so either way, if you have one of those 2 things, you can do at least one of 2 things. You can make data-driven improvements based on the feedback that students or your population have given you, or you can tweak your instrument and make it a better measure of what you were trying to learn more about in the first place. And I think the last thing that I would leave in terms of myth busting around bad data is that even if you are afraid, I worked with a team that was really afraid that they were going to get just horrible, horrible feedback. And I asked, similar to Judd, I was like, why do you think that that's what's going to happen? Are you getting that feedback now in other forms? Are students going to the package center and telling you what a horrible operation you're running? And they said, no, that's not really what we're here. We get really good feedback. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about why you think that a different mechanism for collecting feedback would yield such drastically different information. And they were still really afraid. They were afraid of collecting information and getting, just kind of shredded in the assessment results. And so we took a different approach, and I said, what is something that you're struggling with in the package center? And they said, well, students don't know their addresses, or parents or families don't know their addresses. And then we spend all of our time, rerouting packages, and it really brings down our delivery time. And it's something that we really want to get better. And so I said, okay, let's turn towards measuring how students learn about their addresses instead of measuring their satisfaction with the center. And we took a different path that would help them improve their programs and services. And that example makes me laugh even to this day, because that became one of the most actively engaged teams I ever worked with on an assessment project. They dug into their results so deeply, and they did this whole campaign around helping students understand their addresses, and these buttons and these pins and marketing, sending things to parents. I mean, they went all out to respond to students' feedback about learning their addresses to solve a problem that they were having, right? And when they did they had concrete data in terms of their package delivery time and packages arriving to the proper location. But then they also revisited the results, and they relaunched the assessment to 2 years later to close the assessment loop, and found significant differences in what students knew. And so through that process, that fear really lessened. That idea or that myth of bad data really alleviated, and they became kind of a really great example for the rest of the department and the division for what can happen if we just can kind of rethink it, or see data collection as an opportunity to solve challenges we might have, rather than an opportunity for people to tell us that our services aren't good enough.
I'm glad Ciji touched on defining validity and reliability, because one of the potential myths with assessment is that, again, it stems back to some concerns or nervousness, but that assessment and research are the same thing. And so if I'm not familiar with research, or if I'm intimidated by that I'm intimidated by assessment, or that I might be applying then my research lens to the assessment work, which may not then align with what people are hearing about assessment work. I think here it's important to define assessment. There's a lot of definitions out there around assessment, evaluation, and research. And some, just to offer one, which you may not ascribe to, but research being a paradigm-based effort to create new knowledge and generalize about a phenomena, and it's generally externally facing. Evaluation, measuring effectiveness and involving judgment, and that is typically internal but can be externally facing. And then assessment, really emphasizing student learning and concerned with data-informed strategy and action for betterment, and that's typically internal as well. But the caveat to that is this can all be a continuum of practice, and I think the important thing, regardless of your definition and your understanding, is just to make sure everyone's on the same page. And if your institution views assessment as research, great. Then make sure everyone on campus sees that the same way, and that you then are applying standards of practice accordingly. But if you're at an institution where you do not view them as the same and they are distinctly different things, then make sure that you're not ascribing the standards of one to the other. If assessment is not research, then don't view assessment through a research lens or through research standards. So just make sure to level check in terms of terminology there for folks, and know that there's a lot of different opinions out there, so it's worth checking.
And the last myth that we wanted to touch on is kind of a myth and then a corollary. Assessment proves that our programs work, and then the corollary, this data doesn't prove enough to make a change. And I'm delighted that I get to talk about this one, because I get to use one of my favorite jokes. If you are in search of proof, you will find it in 3 places: a court of law, mathematics, and the liquor store. You won't find proof in assessment. You won't find proof in research either, because while both are systematically gathering data, analyzing it, and interpreting it, each of those steps is subject to mistakes, biases, and other errors. All of these undermine the claim of proof. While research will seek to carefully control for these errors, even the best research design doesn't eliminate all error. And for this reason, in research, it's important to test hypotheses under several different designs and compare the results across them. In assessment, if we use a single source or type of data, we can view that as a good start. It offers us evidence upon which you can build. An assessment plan that includes multiple sources and types of data, qualitative, quantitative, participation swipes, artifacts, surveys. Even that can help you to look for consistent results across the types of data and across the sources of data, and that can build confidence in the findings. It helps us to articulate the limitations of our findings, because we never can control for all possible explanations and errors, though we cannot prove through assessment or research. And to this corollary piece about the data doesn't prove enough to make a change, I would say I must remind us that data may inform change, but data shouldn't be the sole reason for change. Theory, ethics, laws, funding, even campus politics are factors that must be weighed in making a change. Any of these factors alone, including data, might not be persuasive enough to enact the change, but if you have a preponderance of factors supporting change and your data is not among them, you may still enact change. Just be sure to assess it. We wanted to talk a little bit about how SAAL can support your assessment efforts, and we've broken this into 3 general columns of or ways of engaging, one being networking and support. The SAAL listserv is available to anyone who would like to subscribe to the listserv. You can join SAAL if you meet one of the membership criteria, and as a result of joining, you will automatically be added to our listserv. We do have informal meetings at national conferences for assessment and for institutes. We call these SAAL socials at those meetings. We also have an annual meeting. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And SAAL does maintain a presence on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So if you are on any or all 3 of those social media platforms, you can connect with us there to see what kinds of information we might be sharing there on our social media presence.
With respect to professional development, SAAL also hosts structured conversations, which is our term for webinars, because we try and make them interactive and truly make it be a conversation with our members. We also do presentations at conferences. We have an online repository of resources that we maintain and that as a member of SAAL you can access. I'll talk about the open course in actually the next slide. And then we try to maintain a professional development calendar in relation to the different activities that we are coordinating so that members can see what's coming up.
And so in terms of advancing assessment scholarship, we also house the Journal of Student Affairs Inquiry, which is an opportunity for those of you who are working on assessment-related projects or collaborating with student affairs partners to do so. It's a publishing opportunity. It's also a great resource in terms of just if you're trying to understand what some of your peers are doing or how different people have approached assessment work in the past. It's a great resource. In addition, Joe mentioned the resource repository. This is an absolute goldmine in terms of data and knowledge and just information and practices across the field that's been accumulated over time. Oftentimes when there are questions on the listserv and that community kind of rushes in to answer those questions, more often than not, people are referred to the resource repository. And last year, SAAL launched the Student Affairs Assessment Leaders blog, and we really view this blog as an invitation to come to the table and have a conversation and to dialogue. We're working on a series now of posts where people are posting about articles that they publish, and then we're bringing in people to respond to those. And so it really is meant to be engaging, a commentary and a discussion. And we would invite anybody listening today to come to that table and share your story or read past posts and comment and provide your feedback as well.
Speaking of invitations, I'd invite folks to check out our open course. So we offer a free 8-week online course on student affairs assessment. It's slanted towards leadership for student affairs folks who are leading assessment activity, but even if you're just wanting to learn more about assessment, it's worth checking out. And the course did start January 21st, but again, it's an open course. It's completely self-paced. We're still, I saw today there were about 10 people that posted on the first week discussion board. So people are still joining. We have over 1,200 people enrolled in this section. It runs until March 18th. And you can see that registration's open until March 15th, so just about the end of the course, because for us, what we care about is that folks have access to these resources and that hopefully they're able to take back some tips and tricks on the information. And there are weekly quizzes a quiz in each module. If you get 75% or better, then you'll get a statement of accomplishment. The next slide here just gives you a peek at what the content generally looks like. So it kind of covers the assessment cycle as well as some other pertinent elements to consider in assessment work, and it's broken down in 8 different modules. We encourage you to sign up. You can do so. You can get the link from the SAAL website or also with our partner, Colorado State.
SAAL will be having its annual meeting this year at ACPA. We alternate between ACPA and NASPA. Our annual meeting this year will be on Sunday, March 3rd from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern in the MIT room at the Boston Marriott Copley Place. We will have that meeting, and then from that meeting we will kind of adjourn and go over to the opening session for ACPA. We will also have a networking social at both ACPA and at NASPA. This is kind of a historical, customary thing for us to do. It is an opportunity for the SAAL members who are at either of those 2 conferences to kind of get together and enjoy some networking together. Watch the SAAL listserv for more details about those. We are in stages of finalizing exactly when and where those are going to be. If you are not a member of SAAL but would like to join, it is very easy to connect with us and to join. studentaffairs.assessment.org/join will take you to our website where you can complete the online form. If you meet the membership criteria, then we will welcome you in and add you to our listserv. The listserv is for members only, so if you want to participate in the listserv, you do need to go ahead and join as a member. You'll be notified of SAAL activities, including where networking socials are going to be, and you'll become part of that assessment conversation that others have alluded to today.
Thank you, Judd, and everyone. I've been taking good notes as you've all been talking, and I hope this has been a meaningful conversation for the folks who are participating today. I wanted to just touch base at the end in terms of that idea of resources and thinking about where to go. Webinars like today, Campus Labs, we do a lot of thought leadership and webinars that are not necessarily technology related, but these sorts of things. So please check out, as Tyler mentioned, our Campus Intelligence website. And for those of you who are Campus Labs member campuses, you know you have a consultant to turn to, but we also have an assessment credential. And I think our target audience is a little different than SAAL's. It's for foundational competencies based on the NASPA ACPA assessment evaluation and research competencies. So we are thinking about beginners or folks, experienced student affairs practitioners who may be new to assessment work in their role. So feel free to check that out on our website as well. And then I would just put in a plug for our Elevate conference. Campus Labs is sponsoring our own conference around assessment and institutional effectiveness, and that will be held in Baltimore in July. So I'd encourage you to take a look at our conference and pre-conference sessions there, and we do have some early bird registration up through March. So at this time, I want to thank our panelists for all their ideas, and I'd like to turn and see if anyone who's been listening in has a question for our panelists, and I'll try to facilitate to asking those. I think one of them is someone had asked a question about the importance of assessment, and with everyone being busy, how do people fit that into their in a practical way into their daily work? I don't know if any of you have questions about just tips or strategies beyond what you maybe have already mentioned that you'd like to share.
Hi, this is Joe. I don't think it's necessarily beyond what we covered, but maybe just tying some pieces together of, again, going back to the purpose of assessment being designed to answer questions. As Ciji mentioned, cultivating some inquiry there, and as Nicole mentioned, with connecting it to goals and what people are concerned with for their areas, and assessment just helps evidence that. And so, if you're not making time for assessment, then I'd wonder, well, what are you using to make your decisions? And so assessment is really just an avenue to help get some evidence and answers to questions. And so I always say it's in your best interest to make the time and engage, because it should be meaningful and connected to your work. If it's not, I think that's when you kind of work with folks on campus to figure out how to make it so.
That's great.
Something else I'd want to chime in with too, if I could, is thinking about the investment of engaging in assessment. And I think sometimes we tend to kind of front load if someone is through onboarding, their entry into the organization of setting kind of the tone for, not making time, but it is your responsibility, moving forward, just really like investing on the front end, like developing some of those skills so that when it comes time to when you actually need to do the work, it's not like you have to, dust off the cobwebs and then make it seem a lot more laborious in terms of I need to brush up on my skills. But if you continue to engage in the work and also really invest, I think on that front end of really getting some of the skills, that it's not going to seem nearly as taxing, I think. And then also someone mentioned previously in our talk today about champions. We had a really excellent experience at our campus recently where there was a director who said, I'm taking my entire unit of 25 people offline to do 2 intensive half days on engaging in assessment work. And I think that will just pay dividends on people being able to go off and do this work on their own as well. So it's not like you have to take that time of, going offline for 1 full day in total to be able to learn and so forth. They now have some basic skills where they can go forward and do some things on their own.
Great suggestions. We have one more. It's sort of posed as a comment from our participant, but I'd love feedback from you all on this. And I thought it was a good observation. It was noticing that on their campus, folks who were really clear about the mission of their area, whether that's department or the division, and the strategic planning that was involved, that they seem to be more advanced in their assessment practices. So maybe just a little bit about the relationship between, say, mission, strategic planning, and assessment as part of effective assessment practices. Any thoughts you all have on that?
Sure. Earlier, I had mentioned Mackie Bresciani's organic iterative cycle of assessment. At the center of that cycle is the mission, the department goals or strategic plan, and the objectives and learning outcomes. Those really center what the assessment work is revolving around, or what the assessment cycle is revolving around. So it's not a surprise to me that the staff on the campus that are tuned into mission and strategic plan are also thinking in terms of how are we what kind of evidence are we collecting to show that we are on mission? What kind of evidence do we have that shows that we are making progress?
I would add to that when you have a really clear sense of what you're doing and where you're going, sometimes that brings a lot of clarity to the questions you have about that work. And sometimes a stumbling block with getting started with assessment is just, where do I start? How do I figure out that one question? I had a new staff member walk into my office one time and say, I want to figure out the impact of living in my residence hall on student success. And I was like, wow, what a question. And it was awesome because that person really had shied away from assessment and had found a fire for it. But sometimes when you have that clear mission that people understand and can reiterate, when you have that strategic plan, it really helps to get clear with your questions, which really helps to simplify the assessment process.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And Tyler, I think you have a few closing comments for us as we wrap up our webinar today.
Thanks, Anne. And I'd like to thank all of our presenters for sharing their expertise and insight about assessment myths, shattering misconceptions. Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you tune in for future webinars on campusintelligence.com.